Good morning. On behalf of the National Governors Association, Council of Chief State School Officers of Achieve, I want to welcome you to the release of the International Benchmarking Report. Clearly, as we look around now, the U.S. economy is going through a major restructuring. You see it in the investment banking industry. It's almost been obliterated. You see it in the overall banking industry in terms of its concentration. You see it in the auto industry with its major downsizing. Clearly, a lot of this is due to the mortgage and the liquidity problems. But I would argue it's also true to the fact that we now live in an open economy and we must compete with the rest of the world. The U.S. economy is still rated as the #1 competitive economy in the world. However, I would argue that we're being challenged significantly by other countries. Most educators and economists would tend to argue that the best measure of future competitiveness is the education and training level of current students. In fact, many of us economists even go a little bit further. When you look at the statistical work that's done on the relationship, we might argue that 75% of the productivity of a country really depends upon the education and training of the workforce. So this is a major issue that we are focused on now, preparing students for the global marketplace. No longer do we compare Iowa against Mississippi. It really doesn't matter very much anymore. We've really got to compare the U.S. students to Denmark, to Singapore, and others. It's also true on benchmarking that it's not just to calculate the rankings and the differences, although that is important. But what's perhaps more important is that there is information that we can learn from other countries in terms of best practices that we can copy and use to help. One of the things we find when you do look at a lot of the other countries, the amount of data that they collect that's helpful in doing that is greater than our own. This effort was led really by two governors, Governor Perdue, Governor Napolitano, and Craig Barrett at Intel, as well as a very, very high-level advisory group. At one time, we actually thought all three of the co-chairs would be here, but we lost one to the new cabinet. Unfortunately, Craig Barrett is out of the country, and we just recently lost Governor Perdue. He's doing what most governors are doing right now, making budget cuts for this next round. So unfortunately, they were not able to be here. The only other thing I'll mention is that the advisory group and all of us felt that what was important is that this was a state-led initiative, and the advisory group basically supported that, and that's the way we moved forward on it. So we're not looking for a lot of federal assistance on this. This is really a state-run effort. Let me call on Dane Lynn, who heads the Center of Best Practices Education Group, to give you an overview of the report recommendations. Dane?
Thanks, Ray. Before I go into some of the recommendations this morning, I just want to acknowledge the contributions of a number of individuals and what the contributions they've made over the past, what seems like an eternity, to get this report developed. Our colleagues at the Council of Chief State School Officers, our writer who's sitting in the back, Craig Gerald, who did an immense amount of research for us in addition to writing the report, our colleagues in the Education Division, and particularly Eileen Berman and her work, but also Joe Modiska, our colleague on the lobbying side of the organization, and Sandy Boyd, who's also here with us at Achieve. This was a real team effort, and I think it's reflected in the quality of the report that we produced. So thank you all for your contributions. I'm going to spend a little time going over highlighting for you the recommendations in the report. It's important for you to know that to develop the recommended actions, we really looked for policy areas where research has shown a robust relationship to results, identified areas where state leaders can make changes, and determined areas of action that are not unique to particular cultural or structural situations. That is, we examined based on reviews of research and interviews with a number of individuals like Andreas Schleicher from OECD, Vivian Stewart with the Asia Society, Bill Schmidt, who's done an immense amount of work on the standards, both nationally and internationally. We relied on them, and again, in addition to the research, for policy actions that the U.S. can adopt or modify to improve their educational outcomes, but also at the same time meet the unique needs given each state's context, because we all know that not all states are in the same place. As a result, the advisory group unanimously agreed on 5 key action steps that states can take, and we really focused on the high impact on student performance and a high potential for learning from high-performing countries. We understand that these recommendations are not the silver bullet and what it's going to take to fix or to help our U.S. systems be benchmarked internationally. But we do believe these are the core, these are the foundation by which all states should be internationally benchmarking their system. The first one really focuses on an area that we've been doing a lot of work over the past several years, and Mike Cohen from Achieve will talk a little bit in greater detail about this one. But it focuses on the upgrading of state standards and encourages states to adopt a common core of internationally benchmarked standards in math and English language arts across the K-12 system to ensure that students are equipped with the necessary knowledge and skills to be globally competitive. This recommendation, the implementation of this recommendation, will really build on the work of the America Diploma Project that's been taking place over the past several years. And again, I'll let Mike talk a little bit about that later in this morning's presentation. The second area focuses on the importance of states leveraging their collective influence to ensure that the textbooks, digital media, curricula, and assessments are aligned to internationally benchmarked standards and draw on the lessons from high-performing nations and states. One way to do this is by having states share resources and expertise to develop assessments or a common pool of assessment items that are aligned to the standards and will be developed through the Common Core Standards Initiative. The second is that states could pool resources to develop new tools, such as diagnostic assessments that are aligned to the internationally benchmarked standards. And the last is the development of a Common Core standard, of the Common Core standards, could provide the textbook industry with the tools they need to develop textbooks and digital media that are focused and coherent versus the current model, which includes materials that attempt to match virtually every state's standards. When I was in a state, we used to say the textbook companies would come to us and they'd show us how they match the key words. And we need to do more than matching key words. We need to match concepts. But we also need to think about trimming the amount of content that's addressed in those textbooks, because as we've learned from other countries, their textbooks are much more focused on a much more tighter set of standards. The third action statement suggests that states revise policies for recruiting, preparing, developing, and supporting teachers and school leaders to reflect human capital practices of top-performing nations and states around the world. This is, in my opinion, one of the most critical elements that we're recommending in this report. None of this work can get done without teachers who understand the standards and their implementation in classrooms. More importantly, we can't leave principals out of this equation. Principals who are instructional leaders and understand the ways in which they have to support teachers to implement these recommendations. But notice that I just didn't talk about recruitment and retention. This is about developing a comprehensive system from the preparation all the way through what we sometimes call the induction or the support of the workforce to ensure that they have the capacity to teach to these high standards. More concretely, one of the recommendations is that there needs to be a close examination of how post-secondary education institutions and the systems are preparing both the teachers and leaders to ensure they're equipped to teach to these standards. We know that from countries like Finland, Korea, Canada, Singapore, They all set higher standards for individuals who want to enter teaching. Finland recruits the top 10% of their graduating class. Singapore recruits the top 30%. We need to be looking for the best and brightest individuals who want to enter the teaching field, as well as leadership positions. Some of these same countries that I've mentioned have developed rigorous pre-service training and professional development for future and current teachers as well. Those same countries provide an array of tools, not just 3-day workshops, but the instructional tools that will enable them, like tools such as diagnostic assessments, that will allow them to effectively align their instruction to the standards that they're teaching students to. The fourth action is focused on holding schools and systems accountable through monitoring, interventions, and support to ensure consistently high performance, drawing upon international practice. We think that states should examine how other countries use assessment for accountability. Many of the leading countries that we have examined use assessment as one tool. It is not the sole tool by which they measure whether or not a school or a district are meeting the expectations as defined by the country, or in our case, by the state. The last recommendation really focuses on measuring state-level education performance globally by examining student achievement and attainment in an international context, that over time students are receiving the education they need to compete in the 21st century. We think that there needs to be a cooperative effort among states to find a streamlined and cost-effective solution for generating international student achievement comparisons. We've heard from a number of governors about the concern that we're testing students at the school level, at the district level. States have their assessments, we have NAEP samples, and we know, or at least there's the perception, that students are being tested quite a bit. We need to develop an assessment system that, yes, is internationally benchmarked, but is more streamlined so that we can spend just as much, if not more time, on instruction. One example is that states could leverage their collective influence in working with the National Association of Governing Boards, NAGB, to explore the feasibility of upgrading NAEP to yield results that are comparable with existing international assessments, such as TIMSS, PISA, or PEARLS. Governors, chiefs, and other leaders should also work to develop assessments that indicate whether or not students are on track for college readiness. It's unfair to the students, to the parents, to let them go through the K-12 system and then tell them in the 12th grade, you've not met the graduation requirements, or you've not passed the exit exam, which oftentimes, if it's administered in the 12th grade, is not a 12th grade exam. We need to look at models like the one in California, where we measure through assessments a student's ability to perform in certain subjects at a particular level, remediate where necessary, so that the student does graduate, but not just graduate equipped to succeed when he or she goes to college. And lastly, states should collect information to compare educational attainment with top performing countries, but also fast improving countries, such as Poland. One thing we've heard is that there are a number of countries who are taking this very seriously. The up and coming countries like Poland, who understand their ability to compete is totally grounded in their ability to prepare students to succeed in going through a K-12 system. Our data suggests that we remain flat. Other countries are beginning to surpass us. So we need to work and focus on increasing the attainment rates in our states. And lastly, the states should collect information, that was the last one, in comparing educational attainment data. In addition to leadership from the states, this report also outlines some broad brush recommendations for the federal government. In particular, the report calls on the federal government to offer new funding, allow existing funds to be used differently to incentivize and accelerate state adoption of the 5 action steps that I've just outlined. At the same time, the federal government should increase its own investment or focus existing resources toward better research and development in the areas outlined in this report, to provide state leaders with more and better information. Our organizations are open to facilitating conversations at the national level and across the country in our states about how this might be accomplished. Some ways the U.S. Department of Education might support state efforts, including gathering and sharing information about best practices in high-performing and fast-improving nations, and convening a technical advisory committee on assessment. Such a committee could examine ways to streamline assessment systems and adapt the national assessment of educational progress to generate international comparisons. I now want to introduce you to our next speaker, Mitch Chester, a state leader who's going to talk about the application of these recommendations. Mitch is the Commissioner of the State of Massachusetts, has long been dedicated to and understands the benefits of international benchmarking. Now in Massachusetts, Commissioner Chester has recently released data that the state's stellar performance on the trends in international math and science study, and along with Minnesota, Massachusetts participated in the international assessment as a nation and performed very well. But that only proves the value of raising standards and international benchmarking. Minnesota adopted the international benchmark standards after it first participated in TIMSS in '95. Since then, Minnesota has made gains on the TIMSS math test that are more than 3 times as big as the gains on the TIMSS, as big as the gains for the U.S. as a whole. Likewise, Massachusetts is known for setting some of the highest academic standards in the country. I welcome Mitch, who is a member of the International Benchmarking Committee, to outline some of the ways in which Massachusetts has taken on this issue. Mitch?
Good morning. Good morning. Well, just to give you a little perspective, because I'm going to talk a little bit about Massachusetts, a little bit about Ohio, actually. I'm started on the job in Massachusetts in May of this year. Previously, for the last 7 years, was in Ohio and in the state education agency as the deputy superintendent in Ohio. So I wish I could take the credit for the recent release of the TIMSS results in Massachusetts. All you have to do is hire me as commissioner, and 4 months later you find out that your performance is among the best in the world. I'm going to make 3 sets of comments. I want to talk about what I see as the value of international benchmarking. I want to talk about the state role in this process, and then I want to talk about the federal role. First of all, I'm really pleased that the direction that the panel took and that the report reflects is in fact thinking about international benchmarking broadly, not simply performance benchmarking, not simply knowing how the performance, the achievement of U.S. students stacks up against those of students in other countries, although I think that's important, but to go much more broadly at what kind of policies and practices are we seeing internationally, and what can we learn from them? What's happening in the strongest performing systems, and what kind of lessons can we import from them? And to me, that's critical. The breadth of the notion of international benchmarking is represented in this report. For me, this is very personal. In Ohio, we undertook, and I think to our knowledge, we're the only state, or maybe the first state, that undertook a project to benchmark our policies and practices, not simply performance, internationally. With the help of Achieve, you'll hear from Mike Cohn shortly, and working with the McKinsey Group, the Achieve and McKinsey did a study of Ohio education policy, kind of took stock of where Ohio was. This study was about 3 years ago or so, 2 or 3 years ago, and gave us a set of recommendations, looking at best practices internationally, looking at where Ohio was, that really were a very practical and savvy set of recommendations that gave us a path forward, some options for a path forward in building on where we were at that point in time in terms of Ohio policy and moving that policy forward using international best practice as benchmarks for that. Now, as you heard, I'm in Massachusetts. We just released the TIMSS results, Trends in International Math and Science Study. Massachusetts and Minnesota were the two states that participated as jurisdictions in the 2007 administration. The U.S. participated as a nation. There were 59 nations in total that participated. Both Minnesota and Massachusetts had participated previously. TIMSS is given every 4 years. First time it was administered was 95. Massachusetts had participated in 1999 for 8th grade only. TIMSS is given in 4th and 8th grade. So we have some, not only do we have our 2007 results, but we have an analysis of how we've progressed since 1999 in 8th grade math and science. Minnesota also had participated previously. And the results are really interesting and provocative. It's not simply a matter of knowing how our students stacked up achievement-wise against other states and countries, but there's a number of insights that we can gain from the data that we're mining currently. Some with the help of Bill Schmidt, who you heard referenced. Bill worked very closely with Minnesota, for example, on revising their curriculum beginning about 8 or 9 years ago. And he was really struck by the progress that Minnesota had made, and he's undertaking an analysis of what can we learn about changes in approach to curriculum, changes in the state role, changes in strategies implemented that in fact account for, or at least contributed to, the gains that Minnesota made from the last time they took the assessment. Similarly, we are doing that, the same kind of analysis with Bill Schmidt's help with Massachusetts data. So again, just not only the ability to know how our students are achieving compared to other students, but in addition, gaining some insights about the kinds of policies and practices that are put in play that make a difference. And it's nice to know that schools make a difference, and I think this data really does show that. So, I've tried to give you a sense of what I see as some of the value, the rationale for international benchmarking. Let me talk a little bit about the state's role. And states, my sense is, and I'm sure Gene's going to talk to this, Gene Wilhoit, Executive Director of CCSSO, I think there's a critical mass of states at this point in time that really understand that to do right by our students, we need to be looking not only at how we compare to each other, but in addition, we need to know whether or not we're giving our students the kind of education that's going to give them options and let them be competitive as they leave our school systems going forward in the 21st century. That conversation is palpable when chiefs get together. And I'm really happy to see, Gene really in his messaging has said very clearly to the states that we need to be able to show that this is the work that we're about. Because again, to really do right by our students, we need to ensure that we've given them the kind of education that's going to give them the opportunity for success going forward. So I see the states collectively as very much committed to and engaged in very concrete ways in moving this agenda forward, in not standing still with where we are, in not being satisfied to simply benchmark our own progress against where we were before, but also to look at how we're doing compared to other nations, other countries. And in that regard, there are a number of states, for example, that are participating in the American Diploma Project that I'm sure Mike Cohn will tell us a little bit about, including the development of a common assessment, an Algebra 2 exam. So there's very tangible efforts that are underway among states that demonstrate the sense of urgency that chief state school officers feel about the need to move this enterprise forward and to keep our sights on what the best in the world are doing to make sure that their young people are being well educated. Finally, let me just say a couple of words about the federal role, which I think is critical. Just start with a little anecdote. In my role, I deal with a number of issues. Some are policy, some are international in scope. Some are dealing with the ice storm that hit northern Massachusetts a week ago. We had an ice storm that really knocked out a number of communities across the state. Some of the school districts have not reopened and won't reopen until after the new year. And I've been starting to get a number of inquiries from districts about whether I'd be willing to waive the 180-day school requirement. And I've been pushing back and saying it's too premature to talk about waiving that requirement. Well, I got an email this morning that purportedly, you never know when you're being told something what the real facts are, but purportedly FEMA officials who are active in that northern tier of Massachusetts right now, FEMA officials purportedly are telling our school officials that they don't have to make up the missing days. So I'll have some messaging to undo when I get back. But that speaks to the federal role. We need to do a better job of figuring out what the federal role is vis-a-vis the state roles. But very appropriately, I think this report calls for the federal government to play an enabling role, to recognize the fact that states, through the governors, through the chief state school officers, are really stepping up to the plate, are very much moving this agenda forward, are tapping into the best knowledge, the best thinking in this area. And I think it's critical that the federal government play an enabling role in that regard. Not try to manage it or oversee it, but really help to propel it through aligning an investment in research that will help us better understand what kinds of practices internationally are making a difference. In my mind, the biggest shift that needs to happen at the federal level is we need to think about our education system nationally as playing a role in terms of our international competitiveness. And as much as I'm a fan of NCLB and the progress it's helped us make, I think that where it's fallen short is in terms of keeping our eye on that national competitiveness agenda. And I'd like to see the federal government shift their thinking in that regard and piggyback on the work that's already emerging from the states through the governors and the chief state school officers. So very happy to be part of the effort to produce this report. And do I turn it to someone, Dane, or is it Mike Cohen from the chief?
As Dane mentioned, one of the first recommendation that the advisory committee made calls on states to adopt a common core of internationally benchmarked standards. And that's work that's already underway, and I want to just take a few minutes to give you a picture of where that stands. As I think Mitchell mentioned, states that are in the American Diploma Project Network and are aligning their end of secondary standards to the demands of college and 21st century careers are already converging around a common core of expectations at the end of high school in mathematics and English language arts. So that work of developing a common core is well underway already. Last July we issued a report showing that 16 states that collectively educate just under 40% of the public school students in the country already have a common core of expectations at the end of high school for mathematics. So that, again, that work is moving forward. Achieve recently began a multi-year study to examine math, literacy, and science standards in high-performing countries around the world. And this was in response to numerous requests from governors and chief state school officers in particular, who wanted to make sure that they were setting the expectations in the right way so that their students were prepared for college and career, but also globally competitive, that they did not any longer want to have simply a domestic focus. So we've been gathering and analyzing standards from a dozen or so countries that are high performing on TIMSS, on PISA, and or on PEARLS, and countries that are showing progress in post-secondary completion rates. We're looking at taking those factors into account as we identify countries to look at. And we're continuing to gather standards and to get them translated into English, which is always helpful if you want to know what they're actually expecting of students. Our analysis is focusing on several major issues. First, on the content and rigor of expectations in high-performing countries. Are high-performing countries expecting more of their students than we are, particularly at the end of secondary school? And are there expectations that we have for our students that other countries don't, that maybe we should take a second look at. Secondly, we're asking the question, to what extent are the standards across countries common? Do high-performing countries share a common core of expectations, and how does that compare to what is emerging as a common core here in the U.S.? Further, where there are differences among the countries, are there things that are important or instructive about those? And even if they're not shared, are there things that, are signals that we ought to be taking a look at expectations in some countries, even if they're not in other countries? And then thirdly, what can we learn from how other countries organize, focus, and communicate their standards? I think almost everyone knows Bill Schmidt's work about how in mathematics, our curricular standards tend to be a mile wide and an inch deep, whereas those in other countries are much more highly focus on only several topics a year, learn them in depth, and then move on. So we want to make sure we are learning from how other countries organize and focus and communicate their standards. Over time, our work will result in several different products. First and foremost for us is we will incorporate what we learned from this international benchmarking effort into a revised or updated set of ADP benchmarks. So as we move forward with states, we are in fact helping them adopt standards that are college, career ready, and internationally benchmarked at the end of high school and ultimately K to 12. So it's not just about the end of high school. Secondly, as that work proceeds and we're at a point where we're prepared to share it, we will put out a series of policy briefs or short reports that begin to share what we're learning from other countries, and we hope to have a larger summary report at the end of our work, but that's not in the immediate future. The team doing the work is standing in the back. They were relieved to hear that. Let me just give you a sense of some of the preliminary findings of interest, and this is coming mainly from what we're learning about expectation in other countries at the end of high school. First of all, in mathematics, it does not appear that other countries, high-performing countries, have more rigorous expectations of what students need to know by the end of high school than do states that are adopting college and career-ready standards. So the good news is the states that have already been working to upgrade their standards appear to be hitting about the right target. They're not far off at all, if they're not far off, period. Secondly, and I found this quite interesting, when we looked at literacy standards in other countries compared to here, one thing that I found striking, the research that's been done by Achieve and others on college and career readiness. When you ask faculty or employers, what are the literacy skills that young people really need to have? They want to make sure they can write well, they can read and understand informational text well, etc. There's not a huge demand instrumentally from those two audiences for students to be well-read in literature, to have a really good grasp of major pieces of literary work. So it was quite striking to notice that in high-performing countries, they place much greater and clearer emphasis on literature than we do. And in fact, you can begin to see the makings of a common reading list across countries, similar authors, similar poets, similar playwrights. That was quite striking. And just a reminder that when you look and see what other countries are doing, you might sometimes be surprised by what you learn, and we ought to be prepared to do that. Third thing that is emerging from this work is that it's clear that there's a lot we can learn from how to better organize, focus, and communicate standards so that they are more manageable, so they communicate more effectively to teachers and others about what's really important to do in the classroom, and that's something we'll be paying a lot of attention to. Finally, not that this is a surprise, but it's been a reminder as we've looked at this, neither in other countries nor in the U.S. are standards the only tools that nations or states use to communicate expectations. What's on the test matters a whole lot. What's in the curriculum and instructional materials matters a whole lot, so that over time, this sort of joint international benchmarking effort is going to have to focus on those kinds of issues as well, and there are recommendations in the report for that. And I just want to close on one last point that underscores, I think, what's important about the report overall. it's striking to us that our expectations for students, at least at the end of high school, seem to be lining up pretty well with what high-performing countries expect. And it's very important to get the expectations right. But we seem to be on track to doing that, and it's a reminder that we ought to be paying attention to how it is that high-performing countries are getting higher performance than we are. It's not just a matter of adjusting the expectations, it's understanding the policies and practices that support good practice in the classroom. That is ultimately going to be, I think, the most important thing that we can learn from this. So thank you. With that, I turn it over to Jean.
Good morning. Well, you will read in the report, and you've just heard that from Ray that the global economy is here to stay, and that you've heard from the rest of us that education is tremendously important in this whole enterprise. In fact, Ray's comment ought to be sobering to all of us. But that economists today are directly linking the improvement of education to an improved economy. So the race is on. This global race is going to continue. It's going to intensify in the next few years. And we are not prepared to be on the losing edge of that race. And therefore, this report talks about some ways we can leverage our advantage by learning and participating in that international community. So there is good news, as you've heard this morning. There are some emerging examples of policies and practices that are underway, and we think by adopting these recommendations we can boost the actions that are occurring in the state. It's clear that we're calling for more action than has occurred to this point, and it's also clear that we're calling on states to expand their horizons. Get outside the boundaries of the United States of America and begin to look at the world as a learning community. Engage more directly with these other countries in learning experiences and in terms of exchanges. Extend the conversation, at least in these 5 areas, and as we move forward we'll find there will be others that we will take on, and to look at them systematically and in ways that we can go beyond sort of isolated examples to large-scale application. NGA, CCSSO, and Achieve are moving forward with these recommendations. We're not going to simply issue this report today and walk away. I will mention 2 broad areas in which our immediate action will be a focus. First, we're going to reach out in more detail and more intensively and draw from other organizations who are doing work in international benchmarking to identify what is working, what actually can be done by us, and how we can learn from both national and international experiences that are underway. There are organizations that have spent years working on these issues. Organizations like the Asia Society are a tremendous resource base to the work that's going on. They've had a wonderful network of learning going on that can be engaged, and the work that comes out of that interaction can be instrumental. There are people like the Aspen Institute, who released a report this week about the work that's going on in one country, Singapore. Again, an in-depth analysis of another country that has taken a very different approach to resource support. There are organizations, the OECD has spent years not only ranking countries in terms of performance, but the most beneficial work out of OECD is the analyses that are coming out of those works and of the trends and patterns that we're seeing in those states. So we are engaged with every one of these 3 organizations and others to intensify our work. And we're looking at researchers. You've heard mentioned this morning Bill Schmidt's name on several occasions, but those individuals have conducted a tremendous amount of research that we are gathering and will continue to monitor and connect to as we move forward. And we will continue to directly interact with other countries. the three organizations were in Singapore last year. We've had learning interactions with Singapore and 12 other countries around their human resource development, what they can do in terms of advancing math and science. So there are some wonderful examples that we are engaged in or committed to over the next few years to learn from these other countries. And then we are also beginning a process of laying groundwork for more substantive work within the organization. You just heard Mike talk about the area that is most advanced at this time, which is the common standards work. But the other areas will need intensive attention. And as Mike concluded his remarks, he noted that by resting on our attempts to identify standards and to align standards and to ignore these other areas would be at our peril, because we can see now emerging from this conversation much more direct work that needs to be done. So in the long term, this will be something that we think will redirect a lot of the work that states will be doing. It will certainly cause us to intensify our work and focus our work as we move forward in this international environment. And we will see, as I think was exemplified by Mitch in his comment, a much stronger commitment on the part of the chiefs and the governors to come together around these very important issues, all leading to a much better education for each of those children. After all, this new mission that we are about in this country cannot be backed away from. We must educate every child to a higher level than we've educated any in our history, and we can't afford to let any of them fall out of that system. We have to learn from this international community. I'm going to open it up now to comments and questions about what you've heard this morning or what might be in the report. Go ahead.
All right. Usually nobody else is going to go. I'm going to go first. And that has to do with ceiling effect and a lot of things that you're dealing with in sector higher education. So what's going on internationally with higher ed, I urge you to stay away from the OECD population ratios, because you wind up comparing the U.S. to Finland, where a country of 5 million people with a declining denominator. What happens? That opened up the equivalent of 600 new four-year colleges in this country in the 1990s. Just you can't make that comparison. Finnish students also enter higher education on average at the age of 23 compared to 19. What they do between high school and age 23 is a mystery, but the fact is that these are very difficult comparisons to make. OECD itself is unhappy with them. We are the biggest ship in the harbor out there among OECD countries, and we're the most diverse, and it's very difficult to do. However, what you should look at, what you are doing here, when you get into that realm, are the benchmarking standards of the Bologna process in Europe, which is the tuning project, which will come to the U.S. very soon. Jane knows about that. We're at the disciplinary level, so that you can move from what Mike's doing on the ADP project into higher education and not lose a beat. You know, we're not, if all you do is the ADP and you don't do the benchmarking, as the Europeans are doing, and 18 countries in Latin America have now taken that on as well. It's going to be a global standard. You're going to run into a ceiling effect across both our associate's degrees, which they call short cycle in other countries, and the bachelor's degrees. So take a look at that very carefully. When you're looking at people coming out of high school, one of the issues that I raise, Mike, is what kind of science is being offered in the high schools. When you see kids coming out of the high schools in Europe with organic chemistry and molecular biology, you have to say, how many high schools in our country offer those courses? I count them on my fingers and toes, conceivably. That doesn't mean everybody takes them, but are they offered and are they there? There are a whole bunch of questions like that, and particularly when you get to Poland as an up-and-coming country, also ask yourself when you get to higher ed, how many of their degrees are now being offered in English? And which is a big change across Europe, and particularly happens at the master's degree level, but it's seeping down to the bachelor's degree level as well. How does that happen? And in a global labor market, those kids are coming out trilingual. Our kids can barely speak English. So, you know, it's a big challenge. That intersection, all I'm asking you to do, watch that intersection between higher ed and pre-collegiate ed. Look at the Bologna process and tuning the benchmarking that's going on across 46 countries in Europe, how it's imitated elsewhere, and make sure you don't run into a ceiling effect.
Well, as you point out, there are tremendous lessons from this interaction. And I think the other point, and Mike, you may want to comment on this in terms of the connections with higher education, the process. But I will just assure you that this is not simply a K-12 agenda. And as the chiefs and the governors have moved forward, and Dane, you may want to comment on the role the governors are playing in this area too. We have in this country traditionally been very separate systems. In terms of actually standard setting, we operate under different assumptions, that is K-12 and higher education. But that no longer is going to be the future agenda in this country. We are looking at a system that brings those two entities together. We're moving away from a system based on structure and organization to one that is based on the needs of children. If we get to that point, then we're going to see some major differences in how we connect the two systems together. I think Mike and Dane, you may want to comment about a couple of points there.
A couple of quick comments. First of all, thanks for the overall point that you're making. Given that our work in Achieve is focused almost entirely on building a better connection between secondary and post-secondary, and no objection to the argument that we ought to keep that in mind as we look internationally. In this, I think it's right on. In this project, to keep it manageable, our first step was to focus on K-12, but I don't think this is the last word on it. Secondly, we've not done a lot of analysis on the science standards in other countries yet, but it is pretty clear that they have a more differentiated approach when they get towards science at the end of the have here. So I think there's a lot to be learned from looking at science and other countries. The third thing I'd say is looking at the transition from secondary to post-secondary, as you well know, depending on the country, those various pathways are particularly complicated. And just sorting out at the secondary level what courses are offered and who is taking them is we're discovering a fairly monumental effort and an area where the data may not be as clear as you'd like. So this is but one thing you should take with comments, these international comparisons are often really complicated to do. The structure of the system is very, the data that's available to help you understand movement through the system it's just not as transparent as we would all like to think, and it either is hard, so there's a long way to go.
Dane, you want to comment about this governor's interest in bringing the systems together?
Two additional points, which Mike's already mentioned. One is bridging two data systems. There's a lot of work going on from a number of organizations to bridge the K-12 and post-secondary data systems so that the left hand can tell the right hand what they're doing, and we can get a better sense of who's actually ready to do some of this work. And I think there's been a lot of progress, but we need to get higher ed to the table and let go of their data systems and their unique data systems. The second is the issue of attainment and the need to really boost attainment in this rate. We focused so much on trying to get them in the door. I mean, regardless of the comparisons to other countries, that we need to do a better job of getting them ready to do college level work and getting them through the system so that they actually end up employed. As a parent, I sure as hope that happens with my own child. But those are two areas that I think we need to focus on.
Governor.
It's a really wonderful roadmap. My interest is who's going to drive down the road, who's going to organize it. For example, I know the work now at Achieve, but the work you've outlined here, which is to move from just end of high school into the K-12 and into the benchmarking, into the packaging of standards and assessments and curriculum. I just wondered, is the Chiefs organization, I know Achieve is working, what you're doing. It's the National Governors Association, Chiefs Organization or somebody going to put together a strategy for implementation. And let me just give one piece of background. All the ones we compete with, the 30 nations, they have a very much more formal national policy and structure to approach change. Finally, I just think about that in terms of the day's headlines of the economy and the incentives to jump in the economy. Everybody but has got a part of that list of 700 trillion or whatever it is, you know, except education. It's not in the list. And I am thoughtful about the timeline here. But my basic question is, great roadmap. Organizationally, is there something that you believe that needs to be put together to get it done? Or do you feel the current relationships of state, federal can get it done?
Roadmap to action. Let me take a first stab and let's see what the others want to add. No, this won't get done if we just drop the report. So all of us have talked about how we're going to organize our work as national representatives of these state leaders. And down the road, we are going to continue the intensive work around standards. That's well underway, as you noted. But the other 4 areas need a lot more attention. But before we jump into those, we know those areas need a little bit more research and interaction than what we've had at this point too. They're not as well developed in terms of the future pathway. So what we intend to do is organize our collective work among the states in a way that there's further learning going on among them, that there is more of a specific action and direction set within each of these 5 areas, and that we can begin to model some of these actions and pull from the work that's being done in the more innovative states or states that are taking on initiatives. We also know that there's going to have to be a much more direct conversation with the federal government about all of this. How does the relationship between the federal government and the states come together in a way that's supportive of each other and is advancing this agenda? We frankly don't have that federal specific agenda lined up at this point. We, as Dane indicated in his comments, have some areas that we've identified and some possibilities for this work, but it'll get more specific as we move ahead. But we know, Governor, we agree with you that we're going to need to keep this issue as a central point for all the work that we do in the future. Dane, sorry, anybody else you want to say anything? Hi.
On my good note, thank you. But actually, it follows very well on the governor's question. And it's a kind of a 2-part question on timing. Because certainly, you know, a lot of recommendations have been made over the years, a lot of work has been done over the years. Just posit that the recommendations, you know, in this report are pretty widely accepted by all the groups that need to be involved in this process. Given the work that you just laid out that still needs to be done to put some flesh on these, what's the timeline? I mean, how long should we expect the initial work to take? How long then would it take to implement the fleshed out recommendations? And then how long before we see the impact on our students' learning based on these? I mean, is it, you know, in our lifetime, just getting shorter all the time, or you know, I mean, that's been part of the difficulty, that you know, the speed with which the states, the feds, you know, have acted hasn't shown, you know, the dramatic results that people want.
I do think there's a stronger sense of urgency across the states today than there has been historically. And I hope you got a sense out of the comments this morning that we're not beginning from a paper that is based on no example of work within states or any sort of commitment from individuals to work together. And I would point both of those. First of all, there are states that are already taking several of these actions. What we haven't done is move them into a systematic approach across all the states, and nor have we begun to talk about them to scale. So the nature of the work will change, but the states, there is a readiness there on the part of both of these groups to move this agenda, and action is underway. Secondly, there is, at this point, a better mechanism for us to think about how we interact with the world. This seemed to be fairly abstract 5 years ago. In fact, the knowledge we were gaining from the world was generally in small pieces and was not truly understood. We've gained a lot of research in the last few years, and we've begun to establish relationships with other countries that are much more meaningful. And it gets back to the governor's point. When we were interacting with the Chinese about the central government, everybody we talked to in the country could tell you exactly where they are on their 5-year plan, and their 10-year plan, and their 15-year plan. Every word that they said, it was almost identical to the person before. We are operating in a different country. And so I guess the final point I would make on it is, we're not going to go to a country, nature of governance in this country where we have a centralized government that's going to be accepted as the sole source for policy making, and everyone marching to it. So it's going to be incumbent on every one of us at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level to come together. If we give up on the goal for our kids or the urgency of the situation, then we will take 10 to 15, 20 years and we'll fail in this effort. I don't believe that's the mindset that we have about it.
Gene, one other response on the how long question. Now, what's really interesting, being steeped in the TIMS results, because they were just recently released, and being one of the 2 states that participated. Both of the states that participated made very strong gains. Not even looking at rankings, right? Rankings, both states did a lot better this time around than they had previously. But comparing their own achievement level compared to, in Massachusetts' case, 8 years earlier, strong progress. So we've got some existence proofs that within a matter of 8 years or so, we can really move the needle substantially on achievement. I mean, I don't know how many followed the TIMS release. Massachusetts went from rankings of like 15, 17, whether you're talking about 4th or 8th grade, whether you're talking about math or science, to in 99 to 2000, where in 2007, where 2nd, 3rd, tied for 1st in 8th grade science. And I mean, we can debate the robustness of the measure, but I think no matter how you look at it, the state really moved far. So it's possible to do that. I think that the challenge is, what can we glean from how we got there, which is what we're working on, that we can then ratchet up. Because for me, the bigger challenge in getting the standards right, which is important, is how do you ensure that all students in the system are experiencing a curriculum that's commensurate with the standards? How do you ensure that the enacted curriculum the students experience, in fact, reflects the aspiration that's stated in the standards?
And I think there are other examples. The one is exemplified by the work around standards. Mike, you may want to mention that, but who would have thought 3 to 4 years ago that we would have states coming together around a common core of learning? In fact, I think the interest level was about 5 states at that time. So to go from that point to 34 states in just 3 years and coming up with a common core and seeing that kind of action is another good example. Data systems. We moved dramatically out of the state initiatives on data systems. Graduation rate was declared by the governors. Now every state is on track to a common definition. So states, you can operate efficiently and effectively in a system that is devolved rather than a centralized government. It is really a matter of will and having learning from those lessons in ways that help you change practice. Back here. Go ahead.
A couple of quick points as I listen to this conversation. One is, it's true, it's always faster to write the report than carry out the recommendations. We've got about 20 years of history on that. Secondly, though, the work that states are being asked to do in this report is not new work. They are working on standards, they are working on assessments, they are working on developing their human capital. What they're being asked to do is look more broadly. right, for practices that can speed up the progress that they're making. So that work can be accelerated, I think, if there's support from both the federal government and the foundation community to support the kind of R&D that's going to be necessary to help states do that. Next point I make is, as Gene already made, we're not going to get the states to march in lockstep. Never been able to do that. I don't think that's going to happen here. I don't think we should try. But the states in recent years have demonstrated a capacity for collective action in education that we've never seen before. And they're doing that because there is a much greater sense of urgency than we've ever seen before at the state level. And there's less interest in protecting, like, the ability of every state to decide precisely what kids need to learn about fractions at what grade level. And much more interest in figuring out how to move more resources to get the job going faster. I think that will help quite a bit.
There's a question back here.
I want to see if you all could comment a little bit on PISA. Two things. You mentioned a recommendation for the governors to try to approach NACD and see if they would be amenable to.
Follow-up study next year on the part of some states. The pressure on the states right now is one that was stated a little bit earlier, and that is we need much better and more reliable comparative data between the performance of students in the United States and students around the world. The instrumentation for gathering that now is another test, and that's the dilemma. Whatever the test would be, TIMSS being one that a couple states have participated in, PISA might be another. We've got to find another solution to this. We can't just continue to add more assessments on top of assessments that are in place. That's why we put a little bit of focus on NAGB in here, National Assessment Governing Board, and that is, we do have a national assessment in this country. We do have a nation's report card. It's a sampling of kids across the United States that leads to a report about relative performance. There is an open question, and the three of us met with the NAGB board about a month ago to have an opening conversation about what's the impact of this on NAGB. And so we're looking at some other solutions. Are there bridging studies that can be done that would reliably predict performance on one test, equating with performance on another test? Are there ways to embed items on existing assessments, either state assessments or on NAGB, that are the same as or similar to those assessments that are on the other tests? Is there some way to restructure the nature of the exams that exist right now so that you're picking up these same skills? So we're certainly not at a point of a direct recommendation on this, but you can see where we're going in terms of the conversation. But clearly, there is a feeling out there that people are overwhelmed with, people on the front line are overwhelmed with the number of assessments that are being developed. It's a matter of a large number, but it's also a matter of the disconnect between and among all those assessments that the children are being exposed to. Goodwill is the intent on everybody's part, but we've got to do a much better job of aligning those assessments. Any other comments from anybody on that? Governor.
I want to try to make a constructive suggestion on communication. Many people in this city will be trying to receive this report with an understanding of how does it fit with the reenactment of Leave No Child Behind. That is the political framework of discussion, and you have a new crew coming into the Department of Education. So in communicating about it, what you're offering is not a substitute for Leave No Child Behind. You're offering a much more complete, enriched, strategic approach. And everybody who listens to it, whether it's a parent or a personal administrator or Congress, needs to have some guidance, some framework. How do I handle this with Leave No Child Behind? And I think in our communication, one thing that's obvious is you're saying we are reaching for a higher level of rigor. And we need to have some accommodation with that, given the present structure of Leave No Child Behind. But I just feel that many people, when you hear this report this morning, are going to be saying, what is the relationship? Second thing I want to say is politically, I'm picking up on your comment, Mike, that you're never going to have unanimous agreement by 50 governors or 50 state school officers. But you're dealing with a Congress that always has unanimous vote, not unanimous, but one single vote on a bill. I mean, it's up or down. And you need to work out what you're going to do over a period of years of dealing with these concepts where they're black and white and you're forming a group of consensus, because that's an unfair fight.
Mitch, you want to jump in?
Yeah, Governor, I think you're exactly right. I mean, there's two very concrete notions that I put on the table. My shorthand during my remarks was that federal policy has to be driven by an international competitiveness agenda. To be more concrete in terms of thinking about the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, it means to me that we've got to come up with a policy that incentivizes states to aim toward aspirational standards and not disincentivizes it. And currently NCLB disincentivizes that. So what does that mean? It means, well, you can't have a 2014 100% proficient as a mark. You've got to either think about a different timeline or think about a different percentage or think about a differentiated set of accountability where maybe there's kind of progress toward a foundational level of skill and progress toward an aspirational level of skill. And I think there's a few proposals out there that would get us there, but that would allow the states to move ahead on the agenda outlined in this report by not creating disincentives on that. That would be one area. The second area for me is the whole federal research agenda, which I think needs to be aligned with the recommendations in this report. There's the investment in education research, I would argue, for the last number of years has been not well aligned at all with federal policy as represented in NCLB in terms of spending those dollars on helping us understand the practices and the approaches that move us ahead. And part of that has to be understanding what's happening in the highest performing countries. So I'd like to see that research investment aligned.
Yeah, you can take many of the areas of NCLB and think about how this report and the strategies we're recommending align or do not align. What we got, let's just take one area of teaching. What we got under highly qualified teaching was basically a common good. That is, we eliminated emergency certified teachers, we eliminated people teaching out of field, but that law will only take us so far. And so what we're seeing here, and I think when you think about current federal policy or issues on the table that might align with this report, there's something out there called the TEACH Act that was introduced in the last Congress by Congressman Miller and Senator Kennedy, which brought forward several ideas about enhancing and supporting the profession to get to a higher level. Well, I would think in that case, you've got a federal piece of legislation that could be overlaid or combined with NCLB thinking, and at the same time overlaid with the recommendations about international benchmarking. You could have a very different kind of approach than what we're seeing now in federal policy. Go ahead.
Following up on that discussion, as we look ahead and see the $700 billion going out the door and other things happening, the link to what you all are saying and what the federal role on these days, right, seems to sort of bypass, although it's in the report, the issue of equity, right, and then how expensive it is in human capital as well as resources to really move that bottom third up and really look at that whole area in terms of what Finland's doing, where very well outlined in this report, right, a structure in Finland that is failure is not an option.
Yeah.
Right, they don't have a built-in one-third failure rate that we do. So as we're looking at globally competent graduates, right, and connecting all of this, is there a way for the state organizations to really call upon the federal government to help in a partnership way, right, with the issue of equity, the issue of high schools, the issue of middle schools, all of which now NCLB is not really paying attention to?
Well, we're going to be working through our own process on the other side of NGA's house and our policy to address the application of this report across the broad set of recommendations. So how that issue will come out, stay tuned.
but that's on the other side of NGA's house, where we're gonna try to work through the efficiency, get to a level of specificity. That's about, unfortunately, Susan, right now, about as much as we can tell you.
Well, Susan, I think you've hit a point where we at the state level and the federal level can come together. After all, behind all federal programs, at least in education at this point, has been this issue of equity. The concern that the underserved be better served through federal resources applied at the state level. And much of No Child Left Behind was a frustration on the part of leaders in Congress that that mission has not been met yet. So I think first, this is a point where we can come together as a federal government and state governments. We are now marching at the state level to this issue of everyone being successful. The feds are interested in their investment in that, supporting that goal. So in my mind, I'm encouraged by what could be done around the equity issue rather than discouraged. It seems to me that could be the point of where we can come very, very directly together in terms of federal policy. I am hearing now that we may have one more, and that will be it, right? I'm getting the sign. Is there one final question? Well, that will do it. Thank you all.